Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something along the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin. And if you're enjoying the conversations here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow wherever you're watching or listening. Also, if you or someone you know would like to come on the show and have a conversation with me, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. My handle there is IsaacR11. You can reach out to me on Blue Sky. My handle there is IsaacLevin.com. Or you can reach out to me on Mastodon. My handle there is IsaacR11@Fossil.org. I got too many social medias, I just realized. So, all right, so with that out of the way, I was having a great conversation with my guests before we got started, and I'm looking forward to learning about their history in tech and what they're doing these days, and just in general, why they love technology as much as they do. So my guest today is Mathias Buus Madsen. Matthias, do you want to say hello, introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello. First of all, very nice to be here. I'm Matthias. I'm the CEO of a company called Hole Punch, which I co-founded some years ago, where we do a bunch of really cool JavaScript and peer-to-peer technology. I'm a very, very big fan and a huge producer, I guess is the word, of open source software. And love to talk about this for hours and hours. So I'm very happy to be here and talk about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, so hours and hours sounds great, but we have an hour, so hopefully,
Sure.
we'll have a great conversation regardless.
Yeah.
So I always love to start my conversations with folks about how they got started. Like, I think there's a pretty good like overlap in the Venn diagram of people that love Marvel, DC superheroes, and people that are in tech. And I love using the phrase like origin story. So like, do you remember like when technology introduced itself to you and you were like, okay, that's the thing. I'm gonna do that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I used to think I was young, and now I realized I'm kind of old recently. Like I'm like in my mid 30s. But I always, at least when I was younger, my start to this kind of stuff was much different than my peers. I started with programming pretty late. I never programmed when I was a kid or like teenager or anything like that. I was just the kind of person. I was the kind of nerd that would just play video games
Sure.
and watch like a very boring kind of nerd. Um, and then at some point, because I'm a Danish, and Denmark, you go to school, and it's kind of like very small country, and it's very structured. And then you go to high school, and then after high school, you go to university. That's like kind of everybody's path, and it's all free because it's Denmark. Um, and when I had to go to university, I was like, what should I do? And I was like, I like playing computer games, but I don't really know anything about computers, so I won't do anything
Sure.
with that. So I actually ended up studying math there, theoretical math, and that was fun. But then at some point, the school was like, "You need to have a job after this."
Mm.
There's not that many math jobs, especially in a country where everybody can just pick their education, because then there's too many mathematicians. So I had to do mandatory computer science, and that's actually how I got started with programming. I was like, I had to do it, and it was really fun. We went in there, and I just had to do it, and I had a lot of fun, and I just been on a path of like doing tons of programming ever since. So that's kind of like my intro to it. So it's kind of like I guess it's a little bit boring to some degree, but
No,
also like
no, no. I don't.
also like you can learn anything at any point, kind of like style.
No, I don't. I don't think it's boring. I think what's interesting to me, and I say this, and people that have probably heard me do this rant, I apologize. Like, so I was a computer science major originally, and I switched to a different major because a couple of reasons, but one of them being the math started to become too hard. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm very fascinated as somebody who has like that gift to be able to kind of understand like discrete concepts in math. Like, what was it about math that really interested you? Like, for instance, like the last course that I took math related in college was like limits and infinite series, and I my brain couldn't comprehend that that was actually math, so I kind of
Yeah.
gave up. Right. So like, what was it about math that you really found fascinating?
Yeah. So first of all, I haven't done any theoretical math in like 15 years. So if you
Oh
start grilling
no.
about this stuff,
Yeah,
now
yeah,
that's
yeah,
really
yeah, yeah.
stupid. But what fascinated me about math, and still fascinates me, I don't do that much math anymore, unfortunately, but was that it's one of those pure things you can study, where first of all you'll get to study with really, really passionate and really smart people, because
Hmm.
not a lot of people do that path. Um, they'll just tell you how it is, cut the bullshit, like, you're doing it wrong, you need to be better, or something like that. But actually, what you ended up learning is problem solving at the end of the day. Just really, really hard, really, really structured problem solving for every day, where you just go in, you're like, here's an abstract problem, how do we solve it? And like some problems are really hard to solve, some problems are easy to solve, sometimes you got to think outside the box. That thing has always been very fascinating to me, especially like with math, because it's kind of like you can just sit by yourself and do it, kind of like with computer science, you can just sit and program. And and what I really like with math is like this, especially to some degree, it's very condensed, right? I remember with when you go to university, you have to buy the study books, right? You have to go buy the books that you read. You have this like intense course over a semester that was like something very advanced, and the book would be like this thick, right? It would be like the thinnest book you ever seen.
Sure.
You're like, what the heck is going on? It's just because every page is like, because they get to the point. So that kind of like cutting the bullshit and then like getting to the point and like learning structured problem solving actually, where also you realize that there's some problems you're just not smart enough to solve, which is a very, very good lesson for you to learn as a human. Because math, when you go to math and you start theoretical math and you think you're good, let me tell you really quickly, you realize you're not that good. Like there's some people out there that is like better, and there's people that are better than them, and there's people that's a lot better than them. So you get to this like reality check really fast. It also helps you then learn actually how do I structure my problem solving in a world where I'm probably not the best. And that was very fascinating. And then when I started doing computer science on top of that, that helped me, I think, to just be like, just problem solving, but now we're doing engineering, but it's kind of like the same thing in computer engineering. And to some degree, we're just not solving like theoretical problems. We're just solving more architectural things, but it's a lot of the same thinking.
Yeah, I will say like math and discrete sciences, like they're pretty undefeated, right? Like eventually like things get proven incorrect all the time, or we get more information we learn, but like I see math everywhere, right? Like, even like if you talk about like creative things like music is all math. A lot of art, like drawing and the symmetry and that, like that's all math too, right? Like golden ratio, like all these sort of things. And it's pretty fascinating to me that we live in this world that is completely like math behind the scenes. But I think a lot of people are probably similar to me, where like after algebra, or even like even if you're a bit more like advanced, like even after calculus, like math just doesn't really make sense.
It goes off the rails really fast, like with the multi-dimensional stuff and
yeah.
No, but it's a lot of fun. I would love to do more of that again, but yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like one thing too that you said that was kind of interesting is like the fact that you kind of were, I wouldn't say forced, but you were kind of led into like this computer science curriculum, right? And I know a handful of for folks that don't know, like Mathias is from Denmark, and I know a lot of people from Denmark that like have computer science backgrounds, and I think there's a joke, right? I think it's like if you come from Denmark, you're either gonna be this or you're gonna be a language designer, right? Because there's there's a lot of very famous programming languages that were created by Danes. Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think that they're like? Is it like the strength of the computer science programs in Denmark? Is it just like people know that it's a very good way to get a very solid career and have a good quality of life? Like, what do you think it is about computer science in Denmark that goes so well together?
I think also to some degree it's all the Nordics in Europe that are very good at it. I'm sure now it's changed. Probably a lot of countries a lot better also, but especially in Denmark, I think. First of all, Denmark is very, very small. It's very small. It's a very small country. It's like 5 million people, very dense size. I can't remember the size, but so there's basically just 2 big universities. That's it. And I don't know how it is now, but when I applied, anybody could get in because they had very generous capacity and stuff like that. But when it's that small, you also get to meet really smart people really fast. So I met a lot of those people you mentioned there, like that did a lot of language design. I met like Bjarne Skovstrup, who made C++ at the university because he came there once in a while when he was in Denmark. And so you have it's like a very flat structure. You have a lot of access to things. But then also, I always say this, the thing you shouldn't underestimate about the Nordics is that people have a lot of free time. there's a lot of free time in the Nordics, both in school. Like school is very relaxed compared to what I hear everywhere else.
Sure.
In high school, university. So, but you're in a college university setting. So there's a lot of time where you just sit down and tinker.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
you get inspired. And I think that's why a lot of these kind of like to a degree soft computer sciences stuff comes out of it. Like I don't know the numbers, but there's probably more languages coming out in startups to some degree, because people get to sit there and tinker with the stuff and make really cool, interesting ideas. And just when I went there, and this is a pretty small university from American standards, like Google had a big office there where they were working on V8, the JavaScript engine, and you got to talk to those people in the Friday bar every Friday where you have a beer and you can meet those people. You can be like, oh, so how does that work? And they would talk to you. So it's very like a simple social environment, and so you just get inspired really fast, and then you have the time to execute on it. And that for me was like also that's essentially my career came from that, just like getting inspired and then just going with it. For sure.
That's great. I mean, interesting about like the fact that people in Denmark, you said they have a lot of free time. Like it's interesting. I think about when you're in college. Like I went to university in the United States, obviously, and I don't remember I had free time, but I was also like an idiot in my early 20s. So like free time is wasted on people like that, right?
Sure.
Do you think that there's a bit more, like I guess if you have like the interests, you'll instead of doing dumb stuff like partying or whatever, like if you have a love for something like computer science, you want to like on your Friday night, you want to like code instead of going out, right? Is that kind of a cultural thing, do you think? Because I think I knew people in college that like they would do that in the computer labs. They would hang out on a Friday and like they would play ping pong or foosball in there or whatever, and there was like a little bit of a culture in that regard. But at least from my experience, like a lot of people in the U.S., like Friday happens and it's time to make poor decisions, I guess you could say.
Well, we definitely have that in Denmark also. I think
Sure.
like in European culture, that tends to start a lot earlier. And at least when I was a kid, you would.
Yeah.
And so you're more refined when you get to you have it out of your system. And in the US, I think you kind of starts at university. But that's just I don't know. That's just me, how I learn from movies and talking to my friends. But and then also like in the US, you have an insane in a good way entrepreneurial like spirit,
Yes,
and like people
sure.
start a lot of companies in schools, and we don't do that at all in that scale. Maybe it's changed now, but like in the Nordics it's much more just academical pursuit, and that's probably also why there's a lot of like language stuff coming out.
Interesting.
And again, you also like also think to some degree, like when I talk to my US friends, like the system in the US, because you have the student debt and those kind of things,
Sure,
like the
sure.
financial, there's the financial aspect of going to school. In Denmark, it's like because it's socialized, so it's free, and you get a little stipend. So you're also just more relaxed, which again, it goes both ways, because then it's like that creates a problem in other ways. But I think that matters in, and yeah, it was really important for me. And like I actually didn't finish. I dropped out in the end because we started a company, me and my friend, to do what was very, very rare back then, that many years ago. But huge impact on my career, just going through, like I did my undergrad there and like did my first year of my master's. So yeah, for sure.
So what kind of classes in college do you remember really being like fascinating to you, like from a computer science perspective? Like, I'm thinking of like typical computer science curriculums in the US. It's like, you learn about operating system design, or you learn about compilers, or, obviously you do like programming classes too, but there's these theoretical classes that they want people to know like how computers work and how computing works instead of just writing code.
Yeah.
Is it similar to that in Denmark, or is there, I think to what you were saying about it kind of being a lot more academic focused, is there substantial more focus on like the how things work versus writing code in like the curriculum?
Yeah, it's like it's very implied there that the writing code is something you do on your own, and then the school is there to help you with the academic pursuit, like understanding compilers and stuff like that. But it's actually funny you say that, because if they ever made a movie about me, there's like one moment when I went to school, university, that like kind of like inspired my entire career from there on out. But that was the first time I had a course on distributed systems, and the teacher there was very talented. He did the simple thing where he had two computers and he wrote a computer program on one that made a TCP connection to the other computer.
Okay.
And the person who hadn't really worked with computer before, just seeing like, I'm just putting data in here and it comes out there, I was like, holy shit. Like
Sure. Yeah.
like that like for me was like immediately like I gotta work with this kind of stuff. And so sometimes it's just the simple things where somebody does something to inspire you and then you just run with it. And that's kind of like, both in open source and also in your career, like whenever you're motivated, you can do crazy things and you can just, nothing will stop you. And everybody will say you shouldn't do stuff. But like that kind of stuff was just, really impactful for me.
Yeah, I mean, like, what was the first programming language that you used? So mine was 8, like not counting like websites. So like I think the first introduction to like programming was like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which, based on when I grew up, like I'm in my late 30s now, like Web 2.0 was like very, very hot. But like the first like real programming language I learned was Ada, and then it transitioned into C++, and then Java, and then C#. And then like scattering other programming languages along the way. But like, what was the first language that you really had to like build something real with, like at least in college?
In college, it was all Java. I don't know.
Okay.
I wonder what it is now. It was all Java, and it was kind of like all of Denmark was getting taken over by Java, and we learned. Do you remember applets? The things they had on the website.
Yeah.
I remember we had web courses there where they were like, "This is the thing you need to learn. Like, forget about everything else. If you just learn applets, that's the future." And that didn't fare that well, I guess. So we learned a lot of Java.
Was it the .do files? Is that what you're talking about? Like,
yeah, the ones you can embed in the as a website.
It
would be like replacement for the web in a browser. So we wrote a lot of those and those things, and we did a lot of courses on like class design and software patterns. They have big book about software. That was like the opposite of the math book. You know how the math book is like this?
Yeah.
Then the software design book is like this, right? So that was like a change of things. But it was all Java, and I wrote a lot of Java, and I enjoyed it back then a lot. And now I don't enjoy it so much more because I guess we evolve. But it was a lot of fun. But I think it's hard actually. Like it's fun to think about back then, like coming into it, because when you come into it with no background, you're just like the professor says this is good, so that's good, right? It's kind of like you're this like naive young brain. So I didn't even explore much else back then because I was just like, that's what we do. So let me just become the best person at doing this. And I wrote a ton of it and like read a lot of books. There was only I do JavaScript now mostly, and I actually I don't think we had any intro to that back then. But I think now they are a little bit more modern. They have more different languages and stuff. It's very important, I think, to be able to do different things.
Interesting. I mean, so here's a question for you then, right? So it like you mentioned you started to get into JavaScript, and that became very fascinating to you. Did you ever go down this path? Like, was it mostly JavaScript? Like you were building things in the web, and then, yeah. So like, and the reason why I ask is because at least like my introduction to JavaScript was like building like web pages, and then like I don't know if this was a thing in Denmark, but like MySpace was a huge thing, and you can customize MySpace pages, and you could put in like CSS and JavaScript, and if you did something wrong, you could like crash browsers. Like that was kind of a thing for a lot. Yeah.
Well, I actually never did any of that. It's funny because I'm remembering now, I did, you remember Flash? Like the
ActionScript. ActionScript, yeah.
Yeah, so I somebody at some point in school showed me Flash, and he's like, you can write these things, like these animations. And I like to draw and stuff like that, so I started making a lot of animations. And then very quickly you realize if you want to make them do anything interesting, you got to use a language, ActionScript. And ActionScript is basically a ripoff of JavaScript. I don't know if that's true, but it feels like it. And I started writing a ton of ActionScript. I was just writing ActionScript all day because I was just very into making these animations. I made all these like things, people getting their head chopped off or whatever, like this fun back then. And at some point, somebody was like, "You should look into JavaScript."
Mm.
And I actually, it's funny because I pivoted from that then to looking into JavaScript. And then I randomly went on Reddit, the website, and I read about Node.js back then.
Oh, yeah,
And that
yeah.
was like Node.js 0.2. So like it just got released. So I randomly found that. I just actually pivoted straight into that.
Yeah.
So I never did
Yeah.
the whole like my website. So just went straight to, as a naive young person, straight into like server-side JavaScript
Sure.
because of ActionScript. So that was yeah, that was a journey for sure.
Yeah, like that's what I'm curious about too, because you know, I think a lot of people they kind of they make a decision at some point if they want to be like working more on front end things versus working more on back end things. And if they decide the front end stuff, they might go down the path of learning some JavaScript framework like Angular, React, Vue. There's 5,000 million of them now. They learn like how to do like proper design with CSS or whatever styling system they use. And then there's people that kind of want to like, I don't want to build UIs, and they go down this path of like building like backend services or APIs. Like they look at more like Node.js, or they look at C#, or they look at those sort of tools, right, or those languages. Was it was it your primary reason is like I don't want to build UIs? Like I'm far more interested in building like services.
No, I didn't even think about it back then.
Okay.
I was just like very, very interested in coding. And
Yeah.
like for me, just the fact that you could just run JavaScript without doing anything, like you could just run that little binary and then you ran your thing without having to click on the browser and refresh it. That was just like, oh, now I can do more stuff. So I would do like, little math programs. I remember writing like, which is a terrible idea. I wrote like because I was from my math background, I just made a little thing that everybody does, like that finds prime numbers, right? And then you realize maybe JavaScript is not the best language for that because it's like very slow for these kind of things.
Sure.
And but it's kind of like stuff like that started turning out more and more things like that, and then getting acquainted with it. And then Node.js had this amazing thing that I always talk about because I was better in Java back then, but Node.js did this amazing thing where if you learn Java and you're like, let me write a little thing that then spins up a web server or whatever, then they'll always tell you, okay, here's the example for writing what they call a simple web server. They always call it a simple web server. So you copy that and you run it, and you can go to shows a page or whatever. And then they always say, but please note that if you want to write something professional, you need to go to the advanced web server that has all this stuff,
Sure.
much more advanced. But Node.js, they always had like, you could go to the website and they're like, copy the web server. That's the web server. Then you just write it. And you're like, oh, okay. So how much does it scale? This is it. That's the advanced, but it's simple. It's like 10 lines of code. And like, that kind of style, just as a young kid, just
Yeah.
really, really resonated well with me because it's just hackers just going crazy.
Yeah. And that kind of transitions pretty good into like the open source thing, right? Like if you start to get into like the JavaScript ecosystem, like Node.js, like you immediately then are like, okay, I don't want to write like every little like piece to my application, so I'm going to like look into NPM. Like when did you start to like think about like building software, building tools that other people could use? Like when did that become a thing for you?
Yeah, well, so when I started Node.js, there was actually no NPM. No NPM. NPM came after because it was so early. But it was exactly that. We would just write code. And we did a little startup that was like a file sharing startup where we wrote on top of Node.js back then, which got semi popular in like pretty popular in Denmark. And we just started like scaling that with like little things, but we're just naive kids, right? Which is I miss being a naive kid where you just sit down, you don't think about, you just write code and do stuff. And at some point, it's kind of like hard to remember when exactly, but at some point we're just like, let's just put these in. I remember we were like, what's this GitHub thing? Let's sign up there. Like, yeah, let's do that. Better than just having it on our computer. We used to use just like, I think we just had it in Dropbox back then. And then we just started putting it up, and then people would find it and start starring various things. And that for me created this dopamine feedback loop where like I kind of like that. So I would just do it more and more because it's also just really good software design, I think, just spitting things out. So I got we just went on like a spree of like doing that and writing a lot of small things. And some of those stuff is still really used today, which is really fun. But like just started doing that, and that kind of like became my hobby. Where some people, would spend their evening writing, gaming, which I did when I was younger, or like solving puzzles or something. I would just sit there and write open source code because I found it so much fun. I still find it fun, and especially in JavaScript, where you can just make like a little thing, put it up there, put it up there, put it up there, and just go crazy like that. That was like no platform does that better than Node.js, and that's why people hate it, because there's so many stuff out there. There's too much stuff. You install your thing, you have all the memes with like install something and get you 8,000 packages. Well, that's part of the cool thing. So you just do that over and over and over again. And I started doing that in like already back then. So a lot of that software was probably really bad because I was very inexperienced.
Well,
but yeah, that was so much fun.
I think that's the best part, in my opinion, about tech, is that if you're okay with people looking at your stuff, you can do and put things out constantly. And sure, every now and then somebody will say like, oh, like, what is this? This is terrible. And that person usually is you. Like, you'll look at code that you wrote like 6 months ago and you're like, oh, this is awful.
Yeah.
Like, what was I thinking here? Like, it's funny because I've had Isaac, the NPM founder, on the show. And it's funny because I asked him, like, do you feel bad for like NPM? And it's kind of like, now it's like one of these things where everybody is so dependent on it. And it's kind of fascinating to me that, you build something in the open to like, okay, like, I need this for a particular reason, but maybe everybody else needs this too. And then there are some things that build this groundswell and people just start using them. Like, as somebody who has built things like that, like, when was the first time that you realized like, oh, like, I'm building this for myself, but like other people probably could take advantage of this technology as well?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, actually, I always did open source because of the joy. I did get a lot of joy out of it, and also just I never cared if people used it. It was just like a lot of fun for me to post, and like my friends would use it. It's kind of like this. So it's like a social game, and you would meet really fun people with that. But like the first time I had anything, well, I don't know if that was the first time, but especially the most consequential time in my early career was I started getting very into BitTorrent because, like you say, people in the Nordics are very into language design. People in the Nordics are very into, back then, piracy also. Let's just put it real. Like, Pirate Bay was from Sweden and stuff like that. Again, a lot of people, a lot of free time. So I was like very fascinated by these protocols for writing things. And I was talking to my friend one day in Copenhagen when I was younger, and he was like, I want to learn JavaScript. What should I do? And I told him this terrible idea where I was like, oh, you should just sit down and write a BitTorrent client. Like, that's how you're probably going to learn everything.
Sure.
How hard can it be? And he was like, he came back and he's like, it's really freaking hard.
Oh,
I was like,
I can imagine. Yeah.
So I was like, oh, maybe I'll give it a try. And I just started doing it. And I just went to Wikipedia and I was like, how does it work? And I just started using my spare time to write a little client. And I would do that with like small modules. So like, spend one day solving one problem at a time and like putting that, like, now I had the protocol parser, I put that up. Nobody cared. But it was kind of like for me, and my friend would follow along and care. And at some point I put it all together, and I had like a little client that was pretty low level in JavaScript, but like it was made like with this idea I had where I wanted to be able to just stream these torrents live. And I hooked it up to a little CLI. I called it PeerFlix, and I put it online. And then that got very viral. People started using that and went crazy. And that was the first time I felt this like, oh my God, what's going on? Like, it's outside my control now. People are just using it in crazy settings. People were getting sued back then because they were using it because they made piracy tools and yada yada. I didn't make any of those, but like a lot of people did. I did that, and I felt both like oh, it was a lot of fun. Made a lot of small modules, and I learned a lot of stuff. But also just like the impact of open source. Like, you can sit there, I was just sitting on my couch writing this stuff, and you can just click publish, and people everywhere in the world will start using this for all kinds of crazy purposes. Nobody can stop it. It's such like, there's no feeling like that kind of like, you're just yourself expressing your like mental thing into a piece of thing, which is why I never could do chemistry or things like that, because that loop is too long and those kind of things. But like in software and math, we can just do that, and we can just click a button, and people can go nuts with it. That's like so insane. So I did that, yeah, and like that got very popular, and that was a lot of fun. I did that for a while.
Yeah,
So yeah,
that's what's super fascinating to me about the open source, I guess, community, is that
yeah,
it's about sharing. It's about sharing, right? And there are some individuals who they take that opportunity, like the sharing opportunity, and then they realize like there's potentially business around this. Like
sure,
when did
yeah.
you realize that like there's actual like business, like people can have a livelihood from open source?
Well, even when I did the client, people made businesses on that. Some were a little bit shadowy, I guess, because like again, like piracy tools, right? But that's when I realized, okay, people definitely make money on this, and I was not that interested, honestly, back then about making any kind of like big money for this. But I was interested in just because I was very in like my open source mindset, which I still is. But I was very I loved what I was doing. But I was very interested in sustainability, and I started doing that a lot. Like, how can I actually just somehow get paid to do this 24/7? Because that was all I wanted to do back then. Just write code, give it away for free, just have complete creative control. And I started getting very involved with like these various projects that was trying to help open source people. Then like Patreon was one of the early ones and stuff like that. But it was really hard. So that was also kind of like a wake up call. It's very hard to make a living in any of this outside like running businesses, which has a lot of pros and cons, but like it's obviously very fun. So that was really hard. But I did, to try to make like when I did a bigger thing. So me and my friend back then tried actually to scale that idea, and we started trying to like talk to people who would give grants. A lot of people in the US give grants for like very interesting things. That's very big. It's kind of funny actually, because people always think about Europe as this like social place where there's a lot of socialism, which is true. But like if you ever want to get grant funding to do anything, good luck getting that in Europe. It's like much easier in America, where people are much more friendly to give tons of money to all kinds of weird things. So we were very lucky to get a bunch of grants in the US to just work on open source, and we that was able to sustain that for like quite a few years, and that was a lot of fun. That's also when I realized to some degree that open source, while it's really fun, just doing that full time, it's also like, I don't know, like I guess also your age and you think differently, but like to some degree there has to be like an ends to the means,
Yeah.
because you wanna you're writing code to some degree to have fun, to solve puzzles, but you also want to change things. And when I worked on BitTorrent, it was kind of like it was a lot of fun, but it didn't really change much. Like the technology had that sense of like it could change things, but then because you don't take charge of it and you don't like lead it, whatever, other people do it, and then maybe it's not the idea you had with it. Maybe it just turns into something else. And that was like kind of like eye opening for me also to think about open source in that way. But yeah.
Yeah, because
But yeah,
I'd imagine, and I've had this conversation with people in the past about like the licensing piece of open source, right? Like, I think you see it, you see it enough where, you know, somebody either uses the wrong license initially, or they realize at some point that they want to monetize the work that they're doing, so they try to update the license or they try to create like a new whatever. And like the community, there's always community backlash to some extent. And
yeah,
I have this whole rant about, you know, people are fine with like things being free, but like heaven forbid like somebody like makes money off of something that once was free. Um
yeah.
and I'd love to get your thoughts as like, you're in this space, you're building tools. Like when does it become like, do you originally like I'd imagine, and I'm going to speak for you, so I apologize. Like when you initially start thinking around like a new concept, you don't immediately think about like, is there a business here? You probably
No.
think like, is something that other people would actually use, and then you maybe build the thing.
Yeah, 100%. Also, like I think I totally agree with you. That's this. I don't know if that's what you said, but that's what I heard at least. Like some people get very angry when people make money on things that used to be free, and I think that is actually perfectly fine. I think like I said, Also, people take open source too seriously. I also, as a person who did a lot of open source, that kind of like, I don't like that. Open source is fun. It should be fun. You should have fun with it as an individual. And after I did BitTorrent, went to a ton of JavaScript conferences and I talked to a lot of people. People will always come up to me and talk about their open source career and how to help. And I'm like, this is a place, this is spoken from privilege because again, I'm from Denmark, I have a lot of free time, but like just have fun with it. That's how you make the best thing and like make different things and just what should I do? What should I do? What should I contribute to? Like, whatever you want. Don't think so much about it. And like it's the same thing with like, turning it into business. Go for it, right? Like, of course, like that's totally what you should do. But also, yeah, like I said before, it's about like an ends to an means to an end, I guess.
Sure.
Is the phrase. What is we want to change in the world on a little bit longer time scale when we're not just doing technology, but like there's a reason.
Yeah.
There was a reason why I all of a sudden pivoted into just writing decentralized technology and writing peer-to-peer tech over and over again. Not just because I like peer-to-peer, because I started thinking like that, and then you gotta like take it to the next level.
Yeah, I'd love to kind of get into that specifically. Like, it seems like you found your niche, right, in like this space, like the peer-to-peer space. Like, you started out like with the with BitTorrent clients and like learning that, like, what fascinated you so much about like the idea that you don't have to go to one centralized source to get something. You can go to multiple sources to kind of aggregate all those things to get something. Like, what was it about that? Like, because at the end of the day, like I think about now, like for folks that are watching this, like we're November of 2024, like social media is starting to like figure out so the like centralization is a bad thing and decentralization is a better thing. And I think of like P2P, like that's been decentralized for years and years and years. Like I don't know how long like the P2P protocol has been around and how long BitTorrent has been around. I could probably look that up, but like, it's the same concept, right? Where it's like instead of going to one source, like I'm not going to, website.com to download a file. I'm going and I'm getting pieces of that file across a bunch of different places. And then all the coalescing is done by me, more or less. Me being like my client that I'm using. Like, I'll stop talking. What fascinates you about like this whole peer-to-peer space?
No, you're completely right. It's because it's the army of one aspect that always fascinates. Everything I do, I'm always thinking about the army of one.
Okay.
Peer-to-peer is the ultimate solution when you're writing software, to just sit there and you just have your computer and then have huge impact. You don't have to like raise capital to do all kinds of crazy things. You don't, although that can help obviously, but like you don't have to like have knowledge of like ops and servers and scale. And if you make something that's very public, it's taken down. When I was younger and you saw, for example, with the Pirate Bay, as like obviously a very extreme example, but like there were just a couple of people just doing this stuff, and people tried to stop them like crazy. They really tried to stop
They're
them.
still trying to stop them.
And they
like,
couldn't.
like
And they're still trying to stop them.
I kid you
And
not.
it's just
Like
three nerds from Sweden.
when the nuclear bomb eventually hits, or like civilization is over, there's going to be like a Pirate Bay server somewhere. Like
Exactly.
I mean, as somebody who in my time, I have taken advantage of the Pirate Bay, and I've taken advantage of torrenting and all of these sort of things. Like I am just consistently impressed by the resiliency of that entire community, because like people don't want to pay for stuff, and they will literally move mountains to not have to pay for stuff.
Well, it's like you're saying that because you're from a big country. Like in a small country, the reason why we pirate is because that's the only way you can watch things.
Sure.
Go to Netflix in Denmark and you realize, oh shit, like nothing is there.
Yeah.
That's always triggering the rebel in me. Again, like from a point of privilege, obviously, like not everything is about watching movies, but you can make that, like you said, with social media, you can make that to everything. And I think for me also then, like especially like in the last 5-10 years, for me it's also about taking that mindset with peer-to-peer and then like decoupling the piracy from it. Piracy is fine, people do whatever they want with that, but like you can apply these ideas to anything, like to any kind of software, to like make components where people can make any kind of app peer-to-peer that have those same qualities we just described, and the same resilience. But it can be cool social apps, it can be cool chat apps like we're doing, it can be cool other things. and you can reuse all those ideas, and that's basically what I spent my open source career trying to educate people about. That it doesn't have to be so complicated. We don't have to like. We got I've been saying this for like the last couple of years, but at some point we nerds let the lawyers take over, I think, and now everybody's kind of always telling us everything has to be so complicated, and we have to have all this. We need to get the nerds back and just like freaking push stuff out there, and then just like not care so much. And that peer-to-peer for me is the ultimate solution for that. Like, just think about how easy it is to look at your computer. You and I could just open the computer right now and write a little module for npm or for .NET or for Java or whatever. And we can just put it online. It can go viral. Maybe it does. Maybe it does. If you and I wanted to do the same thing with like a website or like an app, we have to go to freaking Apple and sign up and give them money and like distribute them and like, infrastructure and yada yada. It's like a whole different game. Like, what happened? That really frustrates me and really motivates me to try and like do a difference through technology, which is all I'm trying to do with my whole career.
I mean, I 100% relate to that. Like, so, Dr. Cybrin, like in chat, just said like, it's not so much about wanting things for free. It's like, you want to own something when you buy it, right? And I think that we're living in this world now where it's like when we buy something, how often do we actually like physically own the thing? Like, you can't go to the store and buy people don't go to the store and buy DVDs anymore. That's not fair. A lot of people still probably go to the store and buy Blu-rays, but most people, like, they consume their media like via some service. They either stream it on a streaming service or they buy it VOD via some service, right? Or like games. Yeah. Like, how many, I don't know how many people still buy like the actual boxes of games. I don't even know if you can still do that. Like, you go to Steam or you go to some other some other tool, and you get the game, and then at any point in time, the person that sold you that game, like, can make the game go away. So like, it's crazy to me that we don't really own the things that we buy anymore, and not to go too far into like the capitalism has failed us sort of conversation, but it's like, I'm genuinely curious as your thoughts is like, we do live in this space where everything is so digital. And what is the tipping point, in your opinion, for like, when is it okay to like try to get access to stuff like the way you're saying it, versus like there is like some underhanded, like, this is corruption, you're doing a bad thing by torrenting, like, because torrenting has like a negative connotation, right?
Yeah, of course.
But like back in the day, like I remember like people would share like research papers. Like that was like that was like one of the startings of his like ways to get like research papers and other like academic things to each other, because hosting files on websites or on servers costs money, like you said.
Yeah. Well, like when I did grants for open source, that's actually what we did. We did peer-to-peer for sharing papers and stuff, because it's a huge problem. And like, not to not answer your question, but it just made me think of this. Like, I recently went to an old module I had that was like 10 years old, some JavaScript I wrote 10 years ago that was still fine. And I went to the repo and like the code was still fine, because code is backwards compared. That's cool. The only thing that broke on that module was they had a little badge from some service I was using. I think it was Travis CI that was rendering if the tests were passing, and that service went out of business. And I was just thinking, wow, this is actually like this is such an example of like centralized failure to some degree, because everything always goes out of business over time, right? Or get acquired or get recycled or whatever. So every time, even if you just rely on a little badge, a little icon, give it time, it's gonna break. Everything is gonna break. So it's really, really important that we to some degree like decouple business from data to some degree here, like, or from infrastructure, and like just have very good infrastructure tools for doing things like that, where these kind of things, kind of like code, right? Code can just exist because it's just text or like data somewhere, and everybody can verify it, and et cetera, et cetera. There's no reason why we can't translate these ideas to social media, to any kind of things. And I think personally that peer-to-peer is a big part of that, because that's basically like the technological ethos, like, make tools where you can wrap anything in these kind of ideas, and then just have them be very, very easy to share. So anybody who's interested can hold a copy, kind of like I would hold a copy of that batch service if I could, because I'm running it. but I can't because that's like technically infeasible because it's like a huge thing that you would never do to me. But if it was peer-to-peer, I would totally do it. So I can bring my own incentives into this and just run it. And like to some degree, I think, if you think about media, it's still insane to me that we have all these like different streaming services when everything should just kind of be like, I don't have a problem paying with things, right? Paying a thing is great. I want to give people money to all the content creators and movie people because I like watching movies. I just want to have access. I want to have access.
Yes.
So I want to have like protocols where I can pay somebody and they can send me a peer-to-peer link and I can get it. And then I own it because I have the peer-to-peer link. They can't revoke it, right? So it's kind of like there's a very, very clear, simple contract here. And the only reason why they're not doing that right now is because of greed, because they want to like squeeze us completely dry or like pay lawyers to like do all these crazy content things. And like, I don't know about you, but it really radicalizes me a lot. Like, I'll go and I'll watch some movie and then I'll go a year later and be like, I'll go back and watch it. And they're like, well, we don't have it anymore now because we lost the rights. And I'm like, is this what the world has come to?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what the heck is going on?
Yeah, I don't want to make too hard of a pivot, but like I want to talk about sorry. I want to talk a little bit about like, you obviously have a passion for like this space, like this peer-to-peer space. And it's kind of motivated you or inspired you to like build tools and build a company around like the peer-to-peer in the peer-to-peer space. I'd like a couple of things. Like one, I'd like you to kind of introduce, the company that you founded, some of the tools you built, and where you think they can be put in to solve problems that like a lot of the things that we're talking about over this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, just first of all, I think this is actually going back to the previous thing we talked about, because I think at some point you gotta get serious about your open source also. And like, there's something everybody who's doing serious open source should think about. Like, if you have a very big passion, at some point you should think about like, what is the thing I actually want to solve? And for me, that kind of like that came like to slow fruition. Is that the word? Over the last like 5-10 years for me, where I'm like, at some point I'm like, you know what? We need to get serious about this, get organized, get people involved, so we can not just have this be like hobby projects that are really cool and like, but like make that impact we want to see actually happen on the world. Like make software, get the resources so we can distribute this anywhere, hire people so we can actually pay them, not just like pay them with a grant that expires after 6 months and then they disappear, because of course they do. Why wouldn't they? And that was a very, very big like eye-opening thing for me. And that's when we started our company Hole Punch, which is a peer-to-peer company where we just built tons of peer-to-peer technology. But like basically all the things we've been talking about is what we're trying to do, like democratize peer-to-peer, get the tools to people, make apps that are really cool. With peer-to-peer, we make a chat app called Keat, which is kind of like trying to demonstrate that you can make really, really good apps with peer-to-peer that are seamless, but like have none of the costs, decentralized, all built on like these kind of like open source technologies. And I think that's really, really important. And there's too few companies in the space. Like we will always want to have more competitors to some degree, because I think like if you look at where the world is going, and as I've gotten older, I've become more and more of a doomer, I guess. But
haven't we all? Like, haven't we all? Like,
haven't we all?
Yeah.
Also with open source, I guess, to some degree, because it's changed. But I think, you mentioned you have free social media in the intro, right? That's crazy. You should have one. You should just have like your data, and then these guys should be broadcasting your data, and you should be able to take that from different ones to other ones. It's crazy to me that we're still in that kind of like feudalism where you have to get your account. It's because they're all taking you hostage to some degree, and that's what we need to change, and that's what we're trying to do.
So talk to me a little bit about like this, like so obviously you could have just created like a tool, right? But obviously when you built out these tools, when you built out Pair, when you built out Keat, like you realize there was a business around this. Like, talk to me a little bit about like the business for these tools, because I think about like it's a very, fine balance, right? Like we're talking about peer-to-peer, and we spent a long time talking about like getting things for free. And now we're talking about, okay, like a service to help you be better in the peer-to-peer space, but it costs money.
Well, our thing is obviously free, and like we're just making free software. But I think for us, it's all about kind of like changing the game a little bit and changing. You had some good criticism about capitalism earlier. I think to some degree this is all kind of like, a little bit out of control. When we started doing peer-to-peer and we were like getting serious about, that's how do we structure this and talk to investors and stuff like that. 9 out of 10 investors back then was like, you should make a coin, you should make a shit coin, and we'll make tons of money, and you have a good peer-to-peer name, we'll be big, we'll sell that, and you'll make tons of money. And we're like, no, we don't want to do that. We want to make things that change the world. Like we're not like, we need to be profitable, obviously, so we can make sustainable business. But the mission here is like to kind of like change the status quo, not just like rug pull a ton of people out of their retail investments. And very, very few people got that, obviously, because that's such an easy way to make money, and that's why you see so much shit out there in the market, to be completely frank. So we're like, we need to make platforms that allow people to run businesses themselves, that can just like, I want you to be able to run your business from home just with peer-to-peer technology, doing streams like this where you get to monetize yourself without having to rely on centralized services that take a cut, being able to advertise things that take without being hostage to them. At any scale you want, like whether you're making like $1 per month or $2 per month or $100,000 per month, that should just be your business, kind of like it is with every other business. For some reason, online is different, where we all just like get cannibalized into these mega franchises, which I guess is also happening to like coffee stores and stuff. But like, you should be able to just do that yourself. And we're making the technology for that. And there's like, my friend always calls this like the Cambrian explosion of like economics to some degree, like, because when you make these kind of things that are so pluggable and modular and can connect to everybody, you're going to have like such an interesting marketplace also where you can very easily compete with something. So like, if you own your data in a social network and it's peer-to-peer and it's actually your data, there's going to be a huge market for just people making front ends and applications for rendering that data. And you're going to be a very attractive provider for these kind of services because they want to get your traffic, right? And you can just, if there's something that's a little bit better, you can always switch because it's your data. So it's kind of like this perfect market, I think, to some degree of like, as soon as you take that hostage part away, where people hold your data hostage, technology becomes really interesting. And just to do full circle, that's kind of like why open source works, because it's like there's nobody taking anything hostage because it's just software. You can just literally just download software and try something else and download something else and try something else. If there's a better database, you just try it and it works. It's not like they're like, oh, you can't do that. You can't do that. You have to stay here because we have all your data. It's like, no, it's freaking my thing.
Sure.
We need to do that with everything, right? And I strongly believe that peer-to-peer is the only way to do that, and that's what we're trying to do at Whole Punch. And if anybody's listening, you should check our stuff out because it's really fun to use. We have a new thing called Pair Runtime, which is trying to like make all this stuff really easy to use and stuff like that, all open source. But I think that's really, really important, and I think that's something we should all be thinking about, why we let that happen, that whole thing, because we kind of let that happen. By just accepting that things get more and more centralized and bigger. But I'll stop ranting now.
So. No. I mean, I appreciate it because I asked the question like, there is a balance, right, between open source software and trying to turn it into something that enterprises can use, right? Because that's the end of the day, right? Like, you're not selling these tools to individual people. You're selling them to organizations, right? Like, at least that's the goal, right? Whenever you build a business, like, it's kind of like you have, especially if it's open source, the free for the day-to-day developer costs money for the company that wants to use it, And I think, I looked at Pair and I looked at Key, and I see the value in in these tools and how they can provide value to me as an individual developer. You want to talk a little bit about like the value that it can bring to like an organization from like a standardization process? Yeah, because I think that's the real sales pitch, right?
Yeah, but I also think what you said there is kind of interesting. Like, why do we have to split between consumer tools and professional tools outside of maybe a licensing thing for some people, which is fine. But like, we built Keat so it works for your personal use. When I talk to my wife, we use Keat, and when we talk in our company, we use Keat, because there shouldn't really be any difference between these kind of tools. And what I think makes peer-to-peer very compelling to organizations, especially in the world we're going into, is like privacy and like control of where your data is. Like, especially when you're in Europe and other places, like when you're using services, you don't know where anything goes, and you don't know who has jurisdiction over anything. If Slack went bankrupt, I don't even know who could have access to that data we had there, because that would be like something you can buy somewhere. it's really, really scary when you start thinking about these from a company point of view, and also for compliance reasons, things like that. With peer-to-peer and like tools like Key, you just have full control. You can just run it all. You can just set up, you don't even need any servers. You can just have your devices in your company and just data swarms between them, but like it just gives you a seamless experience, but you have full control. You can still do backups just with other devices, but like it's just simple as just running the app. I think that's going to be insanely compelling to organizations going forward, like just full control, unstoppability. And again, like no cost because it's just on device. I like to say that one of our biggest features is like, if we go out of business tomorrow, the tools will keep on running. So like you don't even have any concerns there because we made these to not be depending on us. So like, again, we could squeeze a ton more bucks out of our business if we just didn't do that and just made more centralized rate, but we don't want to. So we want to make money elsewhere with more like simple things like we used to do back in the day. Like, there's a ton of small services you can add to these networks to make them better. But like, I think that's what you really need to start thinking about as a company. Like, you need to be taking privacy more serious. You need to take data locality more serious, especially if you're in various countries. You need to take connectivity very serious. In the world we're living in today, it's going to be very clear that there's going to be more and more times when like connectivity between places goes haywire due to various geopolitical things, and cost is going to go up and down like crazy. I'm sure with that stuff, we've seen a lot of awareness now with recently just with like centralized services and how much money they burn because money is not free anymore. So like for me, that's a very simple pitch because I've been talking about peer-to-peer for like 15 years probably, like, but it's never been more relevant than today, and that's the absolute truth. And privacy has never been more relevant than today. So that's super, super important, and especially for companies, and but also for individuals. You should be able to have a private conversation with anybody, and just like have no hidden agendas. Like when you sign up to these social services, why do they want you to sign up? Because they have costs, so that they have to have some sort of edge at some end where they're gonna have to squeeze some money from you. If you sign up to a peer-to-peer service, they don't. Like that's why BitTorrent just keeps on running because nobody's losing any money. Some people might be making money, some people are not, but like there's no like hidden incentives there, and that's just very, very important to think about when you use your tools.
I mean, this is a fascinating conversation. Like when you said hours, like I knew you meant hours, but it's like we've already been talking to an hour, and I feel like we've just kind of hit the crux of it. And I wanted to kind of finish a little bit on Keat specifically, because I think
Sure.
one thing that's interesting to me about Keat is that if you think about this space, like video conferencing, right? Is it safe to say that Keat is in the video conferencing space? That's that?
Yeah,
Okay,
like
cool.
a chat app with
Yeah,
video.
yeah. I just want to make sure that I'm not like I'm doing
No,
it justice by saying that what segment it's in. And like there's a lot of tools in this space. And I think they all kind of serve at the kind of the same way. Right? And like it's, you have a centralized server that handles all of the like the video processing and all of that, right? And going down the path of doing it peer to peer is really fascinating to me. One, because you probably have a bit more control over like the security paradigms, right? Like you can like force the encryption like very, very hard. Like not saying you can't with these other tools, but like I'm genuinely curious as to, when you went down this path and you were thinking about peer to peer stuff, like when did you realize like video conferencing is something that can definitely be, benefited by having like a peer to peer protocol instead of a more traditional one?
Well, like basically, peer-to-peer has many advantages, but one of the things that are most simple to think about is just bandwidth, because bandwidth is free in a peer-to-peer network. It's one of those things we have left in our life that we pay for, and they still give us a lot. So you pay your internet bill every month, but you usually get a ton of unlimited data from that in most places. Whereas if you actually have to pay for the bandwidth on a centralized thing, it's actually pretty expensive. Like at least it's money you have to recoup somewhere. Video calls is interesting, right? Because we talked for an hour now. Just think about how much data that is.
Yeah.
Just think about how much data that's room somewhere. That's real money. Like even on like I'm sure these big companies have like crazy deals, right? But it's like dollars. So that's dollars they have to make back somewhere else because we're not the only ones doing it. So how do they do that? That's always to me like a scary thought to think about, right? Like are they recording this? I don't know. I don't have to be paranoid or anything, but like we don't know. With peer-to-peer, it's the completely opposite. Like it's completely opposite. We're already paying for it, so we can just do a call and we can just blast 4K if we want to, because nobody cares. Like as long as my network can sustain it and your network can sustain it, that's just a free feature. So we can actually, make these kind of things much more adaptive and much more high quality and much more local. And also like the latency kind of stuff matters, I think, a lot, where if I'm talking to somebody in the same city, because peer-to-peer connects very closely, that latency goes down. It's not like going through some server in the US, and you can really feel that. And it, to me, actually, that kind of like changes the conversation sometimes, because as humans, then we feel closer. But like those kind of things are really, really important. And I think as a peer-to-peer developer, something that's really fun to think about, also thinking back into the open source aspect of it, it changes how you think about features a lot. Because if you're running a website and somebody's like, ah, man, wouldn't it be cool if we just had freaking 4K videos on here on everything? At some point, you're gonna think like, yeah, that would be cool, but if that goes viral, we're gonna get a huge bill. Like we're gonna get a bill. So that's like it's a whole business equation also. This feature is not just a feature; it's a whole business equation. With peer-to-peer, you just take that away because you're just like, it's free. It's free because it's just between the devices. So you just do it. So like when we decided to do, so in Keat, for example, we have unlimited file sharing. We don't have like a 10 megabyte limit or whatever. We just did it because like, who cares? You can share a terabyte file. There's some UX stuff obviously around that because it takes a little bit to add it, but like, who cares? It's just a good feature. That's just so liberating as a person who likes to do product, because you can just do all the stuff you want to do and never think about these things. Versus like being, having to think about resources all the time and all the systems. And I think that's like the true unlock. And there's like just so many things like that. You should, when you start digging into it, you'll never stop like pulling that thread.
I mean, this conversation has been great. Like, I'm truly fascinated as somebody who doesn't have a lot of knowledge in the peer to peer space. Like, I've obviously been a consumer of it via miscellaneous things, right? Like understanding that like the applications of it are kind of limitless, right? It is pretty fascinating to me. We've been talking for about an hour, and one of the things that as I love to wrap up with is when you think about we've talked for an hour about how you got started in tech, some of the things that interested you, like how open source introduced itself to you and how you immediately became fascinated with it, and then kind of delving into this peer to peer space. Like, what are some of the things that you think of if you were to kind of summarize this like your life in tech? Like, what would be a couple of things that you would think about?
I mean, so I think first of all, like just when I think back about my open source career, the beauty about open source is also it turns into like a social thing, right? So I met all my close friends today. I mostly met through open source, which is kind of crazy,
Yeah.
and like traveling to conferences and meeting people there. I met one of my co-founders at Hole Punch through this kind of thing also. So like open source really brings people together and like brings smart people together, and you meet very smart people, and that's really really fascinating. And for me, like again, just to go back to the thing I said earlier, for me that this whole thing and it still is just about empowering people to just like being able to do more by themselves or in small groups. I think that's really really important in this world, and I think that's something we lost in this like whole thing of like you have a lot of power as an individual, and it can be, especially in times we live in with like climate change and all this stuff, you can feel really powerless, but you actually have shit tons of power, and you should encapsulate that through technology, through open source, through peer-to-peer. And I think that's what everybody who's in this space should think about, because you can have massive impact just as a single person, not even spending that much time, honestly, because it's just you're so close to so many people and so much change, and that's really really important. So like yeah, people should check out peer-to-peer, because that's like how you give the biggest boost to this thing, in my opinion. And that's why I've been doing this my whole career, and that's just like yeah, check that out.
I mean, all of this has been great. I loved having this conversation because one, like I mentioned, like I learned about like the applications for a technology that I've been aware of, but I've never actually like drilled into. And also, it was great listening to you about, obviously you've kind of dedicated your life to this space and that you have all this passion around it. And I highly recommend folks to take a look at Pear and take a look at Keat. And there'll be links in the show notes to those sites. And also, like, if you want to follow, what Matthias is doing, like you could find them on Twitter. So it's at MAFINTOSH. And before we sign off, my friend, do you have any parting words?
And also we're hiring, so if you're into JavaScript,
There you go.
peer-to-peer, everybody probably says that, but like we do remote and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of stress. I did a talk recently where I showed a picture of me before peer-to-peer. I had hair back then. Now I don't have any hair. So it's like there's a lot of brain teasers, but everybody should work with something impactful and do what they love. And if you're interested in distributed systems, please reach out or try chatting a bunch of stuff on Keat.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate the folks that are tuning in live and the folks listening in the future. This has been a great conversation. My name is Isaac Levin. I hope you enjoyed this, and this has been Coffee and Open Source, and I hope